Hey, everybody, this is Bobby Carlton. I'm the founder of Innovation Women. And today we are going to be talking about how to set your prices. And so I am going to go right off and share my screen. Hello, screen sharing. There we go. Yay for screen sharing and run through a brief presentation in terms of kind of the theory of price setting for speakers. And then I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. So thanks for joining us today. All righty. So quite obviously, getting paid to speak is one of, well, it is the most common question we get asked as an organization. People want to know how to get paid to speak. And I think the big part about getting paid to speak is understanding the speaking opportunities, the speaking landscape, and really who pays and who doesn't. And there is one thing that you always need to be aware of. The people who never ask never get paid, because there are so many organizations out there that are quite willing for you to stand up in front of their audience for free. Now, if you understand a little bit more about the business model and how different organizations make money, sell tickets, and interact with speakers, it will definitely help you on your quest to get paid, to become a paid speaker if you are not already. And if you are a paid speaker, obviously it is great to get more pay or get paid more often. So moving on, what do speakers get paid? I am sure if you are like me, you've probably Googled speaking fees a few hundred times, and you've seen people like Hillary Clinton or Sheryl Sandberg, and they get paid lots of money. Hillary Clinton generally tracks around $200,000 a gig, some higher, some lower, and Sheryl Sandberg is in the kind of $50,000 to $100,000 range. And that's a really big range, but she actually charges different amounts based on where the gig is going to be. So, for example, if it is a West Coast gig, she will actually charge less because she doesn't have to travel and leave her family behind. So that makes a big difference to her. And she actually charges considerably less if it is a West Coast organization and a West Coast event. A few years ago, there was a huge brouhaha around Hillary Clinton and her speaking engagements. And this is all after she was leaving the State Department in 2013. And the AP actually did an analysis of all of the different places that she spoke, how much she got paid for each individual speaking engagement. And they also divided it up into different types of organizations. And I think this is one of the best displays of kind of like why different speaking engagements and different speakers get paid different amounts. This is a single person. And what you can see is the difference in what a single person gets paid, even a person with a highly publicized speaking price. So different organizations pay different amounts because the value is different to those different organizations. So if you are interested in this, I know this particular graphic is tiny, 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 tiny typeface. You can go and look it up. The source is the Associated Press, and it is an analysis of federal records around her speaking engagements. One of the things about speaking price tags is people are really kind of, holding that information very close to the vest. So it's unusual to get this level of detail with any single person speaking engagements and their price tags. Hugely helpful information. So when people come to me and they say, what should I charge? My first reaction is your asking price should always be whatever you can say without laughing or breaking up in some message or some form, and you're probably still asking too little. I've experienced this myself as a speaker. An organization comes to me and they say, what is your speaking price? And I throw a number out there and they go, oh, okay, and hire me. And I'm like, oh, why? Why didn't I ask more? Right. So, if you think about your price point, sometimes you're just gonna have to be bold about it. So I really want you to all think bold when you are putting a price tag on what your speaking is valued. So when you think about public speaking and price tags, frankly, a lot of times your speaker price is determined by the budget on the other side of the table. So when you think about it, think about, how big an audience you're going to be speaking to. Is this a massive conference, a large organization, a wealthy organization, or is it a very small group? I always tell people that when I'm setting my price, I don't want to have my price tag out there. I don't want people to see a specific price tag, partly because I'm going to give a different price to a big organization. Like if Google came to me and said, yes, we'd like you for a half day, I'm going to give them a very different price tag than if the nonprofit down the street says, come and drop in and talk to our interns over lunch. I mean, you just can't even put those same opportunities in the same neighborhood. So you're going to be looking at things like the wealth of the organization, the industry overall. Some industries, like, let's say I'm invited to speak to a hedge fund. Wow, that's going to be very different than going again back to that nonprofit. What is the event's business model? Is this an organization that makes money through events? Is this an events company? Or is this a nonprofit that is using the event as a fundraiser? Or is it a small organization that isn't selling tickets at all? If you look at some organizations, they're meetups and people are not paying to attend the event. So your ticket price, the ticket price and your price tag as a speaker are probably going to be correlated. Some organizations and some speakers will actually set their price by looking at a percentage of the ticket sales. So let's say an organization is selling individual tickets for their event, and those tickets are $3,000. As a speaker, you can look at that price tag and say, okay, they're charging each member of the audience $3,000. They're having 100 people in the room. Wow, that's a pretty big place to start. So you can start working backwards on their budget, their ticket price, and the sales that they are doing with their ticket price, and figure out kind of where you should be asking. You're going to have to be customizing your price tag on a regular basis. Some speakers, though, I will admit, will absolutely say, this is my price. And I think each of us does have what we call the happy price. And that's the price that you feel is appropriate for you, your level of experience, the value you deliver, and where you feel that you are adequately compensated. So your happy price could be completely outside the budget of some organizations. You're probably also going to want to talk to the organization that is asking you to speak and find out the number of speakers. If they're asking you to speak and you are the sole speaker, you obviously are of greater value than if you are one of 600 speakers at the event. So figure out how many speakers are going to be speaking, what part of a role that you play in this whole organization. You also want to look at whether the organization has partners or sponsors who are kicking in money to help support the event. because that could make a big difference in your payday. So let's look at some of the speaker payment models. Number one, back to their budget, letting them set the anchor. When you start the conversation, I usually recommend that people ask if there is a budget for speakers and then ask what they pay. Sometimes they will tell you, we have X amount set aside for our speaker budget. We were working with an organization in the retail space a few years ago, and they were very open in telling me they had $70,000. And for that $70,000, they were looking to get 3 keynotes. Now, they weren't saying we're going to divide it this way or that way, but a $70,000 budget over 3 keynotes is a pretty good payday if they're equally divided. In the end, this particular organization got 3 speakers. One of those speakers was a $40,000 person. So that meant they only had the rest left over for the other 2 speakers. So one ended up being the keynote and the other 2 were supporting speakers and getting significantly less in the payday. I always love sharing with people the Dorie Clark price list. You can find this price list on the Harvard Business Review. It's in an article that Dorie Clark wrote, and she divides speakers into categories. She says a newbie could command between $500 and $2,500. If you are just working on establishing your brand, you've got your first book out, you should be, according to her, in the $5,000 to $10,000 range. If you are an acknowledged speaker and expert in your area, if you've had several books, for example, $10,000 to $20,000. And she says best-selling authors are in the $20,000 to $35,000 range per presentation. Now, I've seen a number of pieces of evidence that this is actually not too far off, except I would say at the lower level. I would say newbies are often in the $500 to $1,500 range. And I find that $1,500 is kind of a set point in a lot of speakers and the price tags and what we hear event managers paying for somebody who is relatively new or somebody who is speaking to a smaller, maybe local organization. If you're looking at something like a local Rotary, for example, or a local business persons association, they are generally in the $500 to $1,000 range just because they are working from a budget that includes memberships and ticket prices. And often the ticket prices in something like this are not going much higher than, say, $25 to $50. And so, $25 to $50 is great for a ticket price, but you also probably are having to figure in a breakfast, a lunch, a dinner. So there's a lot that's being paid for by that ticket price. And I see a lot of those organizations pretty low in terms of what they pay their speakers. There are also a couple of formulas that I do. For example, one is looking at, and again, these are all subject to change and location. In the Boston area, I might be paid more than if I went back to speak in my hometown in the middle of nowhere, upstate New York. So years of experience times $100. And this is a baseline that you would start with when you start looking at how you're going to be figuring out your rate of pay. And so that $100 times, for me, 37 years of experience, starts to get in the $3,500 range. That's actually low based on what I do get paid for a lot of these speaking engagements. And I feel like, it's a good place to start, not necessarily a good place to end up. You want to look at also your hourly rate. This is a formula that works if you are a consultant and you already have a well-established or well-known hourly rate. So I work in public relations. My day job is I run a PR and marketing firm. Everyone on my team has an hourly rate. So you can actually look at it from the point of view of, say, it's going to take you 40 hours to prepare a presentation, and it's going to take you another couple of hours to deliver that presentation. So you're going to figure out your hourly rate. Say my hourly rate was $100 for easy math. And I can say an hourly rate times 42 hours, $4,200. So, that's one way to go about figuring out how much you need to get compensated for what it is you're doing. And another one, and this is kind of tongue in cheek, is I start at $1,500 and I go up and down based on the organization and how much I think they can pay. And by the way, some big, fancy, high priced, incredibly wealthy organizations have less wealthy organizations inside them. So if you're looking, for example, at organizations like an ERG, an employee resource group, employee resource group inside a company, sometimes they have budget that they have been given to do programming, and sometimes they have zero budget at all. I did a speaking engagement a few years ago to an organization that was a public company, so rather well off. And they had a group of women who were forming their own employee resource group, women in the name of the company inserted here. And they had no budget from the organization. This was an organization that they had created themselves, a group that they created themselves. And they brown bagged it to their group lunch when they met in the evenings. Some people, brought in stuff to share. It was more of a potluck thing. And they were bringing in speakers to talk to their group about career concerns. And they didn't have budget for those speakers at all. Now, fast forward another couple of years, that particular group had grown large enough and powerful enough inside the organization to go to management and say, we need your support for this group. And they were given budget. So suddenly they had budget to bring in speakers. So you just have to understand, as I said, the business model and what the realities are of each organization. Now, the best way I always recommend to figure out what to charge is to know what others get paid and what they charge. Some speaker bureaus actually post rates, and you can go and look up a speaker and say, oh, she's, her posted rate is in the $15,000 to $20,000 range. I've got just as many years of experience as she does. We've both written a book and we seem pretty equivalent. I can actually take that information and say, all right, I feel comfortable with this rate, which is akin to her rate. I will also say that when you are looking at the rates that speaker bureaus post, you don't have to take it as gospel in terms of that's what the speaker is taking home. Don't forget, a speaking bureau will take anywhere between 20 and 30% of that rate. So if she's in the $20,000 range, that speaker bureau is going to be taking, several $1,000s of that. So that's actually not what the speaker takes home. Another thing you can do to figure out what to charge is ask a friend or ask a person that you don't necessarily know. One of the things I like to do is look at previous events that were held by the same organization. So many conferences run year after year, annual events. They've been doing the same event year after year, or maybe if it's an organization that holds a monthly meeting, they hold that same event every month. You can actually go to other speakers who have spoken to that group who were previously on stage and ask. And one of the tricks that one of our members actually shared with me is she likes to go to men who speak at the conferences that she speaks at and ask them what they got paid. And she positions it to them as, hey, you want to be a male ally. And I am always concerned that I am not being paid the same amount as male speakers. Can you share with me how much you got paid in confidence so that I know that I'm being compensated the same way a man is? I was like, wow, that's strategic. That is fantastic. And I would say one of the other things is assemble around you a group of speakers who are in the same boat that you're in, or maybe slightly ahead, and have them share information. I don't know, how other people feel. I can only speak for myself, but when I talk to other speakers, I'm pretty willing to share what I get paid. And I'm very open about the fact that I often speak for free because obviously mission-based organization trying to get more women out there speaking. But I also have a way to get more value out of what we do when I speak. I'm speaking to organizations that include event managers who come in and use Innovation Women. And I'm also speaking to organizations with potential speakers. So I do a good amount of speaking for free. I also do some paid speaking engagements, and won't lie, those numbers are all over the place. I have spoken for as little as $300. I have spoken for as much as $10,000. So big, 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 big range. But if you have people that you trust that are not directly competitive to you, I think one of the best opportunities to figure out what you charge is to know what other speakers charge. And that is how you go about setting your speaking price. Now, once you've got that price, there's one more thing you need to think about: how you keep increasing that rate. So some speakers are very open about the fact that they raise their rates every year. They are coming to the market with more value. They have higher visibility. Some organizations they are going back to year after year. And you can use the raise your rate every year strategy as a strategy to book ahead. So what you do is go to organizations who are interested in booking to you and say, I raise my rate every year. However, if you book this year, sign a contract this year, for next year, I will give you this year's rate. So you are avoiding an increase by booking now. So as you're thinking about your rate, also think about how you get to the next step. And raise your rate every year is one strategy that might help you do that. Okie dokie. Helpful? Yes, I hope so. Do we have some questions from folks? Okay, go for it.
So first question is, when it comes to pricing, you talked about book publishing. That was Dorie Clark's model. Mm-hmm. So what if you have a self-published book? Does that is that a different category, or do you still kind of say, okay, I have a book?
Yeah, and I think that there is definitely a slightly lower level of credibility associated with self-publishing versus traditional publishing. Sure. However, that is changing all the time. And I feel like the credibility associated with a traditionally published book continues to slip the more that traditional publishers are offering less. So I know that was really complicated how I answered that, but I do feel like a lot of people are saying, you know what, the traditional way of publishing a book is not for me because it just is not going to make me any money. And, I'm going to do better if I control all aspects of this. Or it could be that there is a great path for me through this non traditional self publishing route. So I do think a lot of it does depend on the quality of the book. There is a whole group of speakers out there who speak to sell, and they are on stage and they are using, I got to the Amazon, I'm a best-selling author because I got to my category number
Right.
one, and they have a whole strategy behind doing that. And the books are lower quality. I've seen a few books that are actually things that it's obvious somebody has created by using a speech to print thing, and they are literally just talking through a book. They hand it off to somebody who lays it out and throws it up on Amazon. They're cheap books. They are not necessarily the credibility enhancing thought leader type book. They are definitely lower quality. And so I think some of it really depends on the quality of the book. I've seen some of these books out that, I'm a grammar nerd. I'm, like super fussy about all the writing that comes out of our organization. They are hard for me to read, and I don't see a lot of value in them. But, a traditional publisher is just a credibility enhancement because there is a hurdle that you had to leap over to get there. So I think there's a big difference still in the amount of pay that as a speaker you can expect if you are not going through a traditional publisher.
So, like, according to Dorie Clark's model, if you have like one book out, you're commanding between $5,000 and $10,000. If that book is self-published, what would those numbers look like?
I think they would probably be I'd say they'd probably be 25 to 50% less.
Okay. Okay, and then my second question was when you talked about raising your rate yearly, which I really love that strategy. Do you say like 10%? Is there like a percentage, or what do you recommend for that?
I've talked to, I'd say, a handful of speakers that use this strategy, and one of them said the first few years that he used this, he was doubling his price. And that was, he said the first year that he was doing it, he was commanding just a couple $1,000s per speech. And he went from 2,000 to 4,000. And he booked out half of his year the next year by using the strategy of saying, I'm raising my rate rather dramatically next year. And, it's going to double. If you book now, you can have this year's rate. And he booked out, he said, from January to June. I was like, wow, that's a great strategy. I like that. Over time, you can't keep doubling because it gets into the ridiculous numbers. But I think, if you're going from 2,000 to 4,000, there is a cliff that happens between 5,000 and 7,500. When you are reaching that point, you're in kind of a different category. There's a smaller group of organizations that pay that much for speakers. And I feel like getting over that hurdle is probably more of an incremental move than the earlier stages.
Makes sense. So, how you were talking about this guy started out with $2,000 as a talk and things like that. And I've been doing speeches mostly for conferences, and those are not paid.
Right. That's understanding that business model. And, conferences, the way they look at it is you have shown up, you have benefited from the stage and the audience that they have gathered for you. You want to get paid to, oh my God. 50% of all event managers have no budget whatsoever for speakers, and they are predominantly in that category. They are running conferences. What you have to do is look for the people who are paying some speakers and get yourself into the category of the some speakers. So they might be paying their keynotes.
Yeah, exactly. So even the conferences where I'm speaking, if you're a keynote, you get paid, but everybody else doesn't, right? So they get the big names, and that helps them kind of get more people into the conference, which I understand.
Yep.
So in other words, to get to a place where you're getting some pay, and I've had like nonprofits and they pay like a few $100s, you know.
Yep.
But to get to that point where you're making like at least those $2,000 or $1,500 plus minus, like you were saying, would you recommend starting with the Speaker Bureau, or what?
Well, the problem with the Speaker Bureau is they are not taking in anybody who isn't already getting paid. Most of the speaker bureaus that I talk with say they are not taking in any speakers unless they're already making between $500 and $7,500 a speech. And that seems to be a pretty steady number across the platforms. So the way is, I'm going to get up on my soapbox a little bit. Traditional speakers bureaus are benefiting from the work that you did to get yourself to that point of being paid. And, if you join a speaker bureau, the benefits that they're offering you are they are negotiating on your behalf. They are managing your contracts. They are perhaps booking your flights and holding your calendar and things like that. It isn't necessarily that they are bringing you to the table. It's more your profile has risen to the point of people come looking for you, and the speaker bureau manages you. Now, some speaker bureaus have a cadre of clients. They have established a relationship with people who need speakers on a regular basis. So you could find yourself benefiting from those relationships. But depending on how you work your business model, you have then lost something incredibly valuable. You have lost the ability to have a direct relationship with that company. Google brings you in because you are working with the speaker bureau. And what happens then is you give a speech, but your contract, you're precluded from having an additional relationship with Google because that relationship is held by the organization that brought you in.
Right.
So speakers bureaus are not necessarily the way to go. The way to go is probably to expand outwards and look at the types of organization and the types of speaking that you're doing.
So where do you get started if you can't? It sounds like you have to figure it out on your own, make a bunch of money on your talks, and then they'll take you, which makes no sense because then you don't need them at that point.
I know, which is why I always go, about speakers bureaus. I actually had a really great conversation yesterday with a woman who has left a speaker bureau. And she gave me like all kinds of like great insight, some of which I knew already, but she did give me some really good stuff that, I hadn't thought about before. And, she's like, the speaker bureau era is kind of done. She's like, smart people are saying, it's like, I can do this on my own. I can search the web. I can, have a sales team that goes off and pitches me. And sometimes it's just come down to referrals. A few years ago, I went out to the IEEE Women in Engineering International Leadership Conference. And one of like 4 or 5 of our speakers from Innovation Women were there, but I sat in on one of our speakers' presentation and she killed it. She did a great job in terms of presenting and giving good value for the presentation that she was doing. But the best part about it was she left enough kind of like, I'll call them breadcrumbs.
Yeah.
For the audience to follow along and say, oh, she does other things that are related. And I watched at the end of her presentation, there was a little line that was formed at the edge of the stage. And I sat there and listened to people give her, their cards and go, how much does it cost to have you come and do that presentation and others in my company? So I think part of the key is really getting in front of those people and using conferences as auditions and making sure that that audience is an audience that is ripe for you to give a presentation to, that gets you leads that you turn into more speaking engagements. Sometimes that comes about by, if you're doing a presentation at a conference, figuring out how to capture that audience so you can follow up with them. Hey, you came and saw me at this presentation I did. Do you think your company would be interested in having me in to do the same thing? Like, your topic, burnout, companies are terrified of that right now. I mean, they are really worried about their employees. You should be doing tons of corporate stuff. And that's where the money is. And sometimes I have a presentation that I do actually about getting paid to speak. So it's in the list of the knowledge sessions. And there is a chart in there that says, is positioning yourself as a speaker costing you money? Because sometimes you're better off if you're positioning yourself as a workshop leader, or you're positioning yourself as a facilitator, or you're positioning yourself as a consultant. Because getting paid to speak is probably less of a payday than coming in as a burnout consultant for a corporation.
Yeah, I like that.
So does that help?
Yeah, that's great. Any thoughts on, like, so you were saying in that video, do you talk about how to get those corporate gigs?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm gonna go look for that.
Yeah. And one of the big things, and I'll tell you right off the bat, is looking at the places you're speaking, because a lot of people look at the industry of the conference. Like, for example, I'm a PR person. I could go and speak at PRSA conferences all day long.
Mm-hmm.
The Public Relations Society of America. But who's in the audience there? My competitors. It's like another PR firm is not going to hire me to come in and talk about public speaking. So if I look outside my industry, I may have more success finding customers in the audience than if I speak to my own industry.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So, all right.
Thank you.
Cool. Helpful.
Awesome.
All right. I'm going to stop the recording now. Thanks for joining us today, and check out more of our knowledge session recordings. I think this one's like number 15. Oh my God. So many of them. We're here every other Thursday. Thanks again. Sure you want to stop recording?